video, we're going to take a closer look at Yonec, a lay. If you haven't read the story yet, please pause and turn to the story on page 25 in the Norton textbook. Read through it on your own and then return to the video. So first, let's review the basic plot and our cast of characters. The nameless young lady is married off against her will to the paranoid old lord or seigneur of Caerwent, who hopes that she will give him an heir. He keeps her locked away in a tower. In her sadness, she remembers stories of romance and praise for the kind of knight that one would read about in a tale of courtly love. And then suddenly, a hawk flies through her window and turns into a handsome knight. His name is Muldrek, and he says he's loved her from afar, could only come to her once she made her wish. They have a short-lived love affair, but it's a happy one. In fact, too happy. The lady is full of beauty and joy, and her husband grows suspicious, assuming she's having an affair. And he discovers that she is, and he sets spikes in her window, which kill Moldmarek when he visits. And as the night dies, he tells the lady that she is pregnant with their son and asks her to name him Yonec. Before he dies, he gives her a sword for Yonec and a ring that will keep her husband, the Lord of Caerwent, from remembering what has happened, so that he doesn't remember her affair and will think that Yonec is his own son. And so years later, we skip ahead in time. Yonec has grown up, he's become a knight, and by chance or by fate, of course, Yonec, his mother, and the man he thinks is his father are traveling. They come across Modomorek's grave. It's revealed that this is his true father, and the Lord of Caerwent murdered him. And so finally, the lady gives her son this sword. He avenges his mother and true father by killing the Lord of Caerwent, and then he becomes a king in the end. So, yeah, there's a lot going on there. Let's unpack some of it a little bit. The story definitely draws from elements of other medieval romances, as well as actual medieval culture, as we talked about it in our previous video. The nameless young lady, like many real women, is married off with no say in the matter. She's quite vocal about this. On page 26, she delivers a monologue to herself in which she curses her family for giving her to Sir Jealousy, as she calls him. And she says that they've married her to a carcass that she fears will never die. Now, if that seems a little harsh, well, let's look at who she married. So on page 25, we learn about the Seigneur of Caerwent. He's advanced, but wants to marry a young woman so he can ensure his great family lineage will carry on, which is in keeping of ideas about marriage at the time. So he wants an heir. But the word choices here emphasize how little his wife means to him outside of this role. We are told that he hoped to breed, and he thinks of her as a fine award for a rich man. Beautiful she is. He locks her away in a room in a tower, and we assume he fears that someone else will claim her, so hence he keeps her there. Well, she's stuck in this room. She's not allowed to go anywhere, not even to church. She can't see friends or family. And this goes on for 7 years. And that's when the action of the story picks up. Now, in all of this time, we get, again, the impression that she only sees her husband when he comes to the tower to sleep with her. But so far, she hasn't produced an heir. She hasn't gotten pregnant. She is wasting away in her sorrow and depression. She gets to the point where she is longing for death, and then a change comes. In addition to evoking traditions of the courtly romance when our young handsome knight Moldmarek shows up, this story also recalls folklore, fairy tale, mythology traditions. There's a term for connections between stories. We call it intertextuality. It's a literary theory that states that all works are connected to each other, that every work of literature has been influenced by another work of literature. The literary critic Julia Kristeva coined this term intertextuality, and she posited the idea that whether consciously or not, all works of literature bear traces of other works of literature, and nothing is truly new or original, but it's not a bad thing. It helps us to see the connections between different works throughout time and Yonec to other stories. You might think of the woman trapped in a tower, and that might recall for you the story of Rapunzel. Now, the earliest version of this fairy tale was written down in French as a story called Personette around 1698. So Yonec predates this. Maybe it was the inspiration. Now, in the fairy tale of Rapunzel, it's an old lady, a witch, who locks the girl up. But when her lover is discovered, he falls from the tower, he blinds himself on thorn bushes, and Rapunzel is banished. She must go to the desert in this version of the story and give birth to their twins, but they are eventually reunited. Now, in Yonec, we do still have some of those ingredients. We don't have the long hair by which he climbs up, but the fall from the tower, the injury of the lover, those are both present, though in this case, the knight dies. Now, both Rapunzel and the Lady of Marie de France's tale could be categorized as part of what folklorists call a maiden in the tower archetype. This is a kind of story that's told over and over again. It goes back to Proto Indo European myths. Now, the earliest Rapunzel-esque story in which a man climbs a tower by his lover's hair, yes, there are more than one, there are many. This is actually first Persian poem, Shahnameh, written by Ferdowsi in the 10th century, which would predate Yonec. Now, Marie de France was most likely finding her inspiration for her story in Greek mythology, if anything, which she could have read in the Latin stories of Ovid. Particularly, we could see some similarities in the stories of Danae. So, when Danae's father learned a prophecy, he learned of a prophecy that he was destined to be killed by her future son, he locks her away. But Zeus, good old Zeus, breaks in, he impregnates her, and she gives birth to Perseus, a very important figure in Greek mythology. So when Dad finds out, he places his daughter and her baby in a chest and sets them adrift at sea. And the story goes on from there. But spoiler, Perseus in the end does get his grandfather. Now, there are many other stories that bear similarities with these plots. So much of our storytelling is indebted to tales that have come before, and people just add their voices. Such is the case with Yonec. So, what makes Marie de France's tale unique, however? Perhaps it is in the power and agency that she invests her heroine with. His monologue. So she's been crying and cursing her family, and then suddenly she makes a rather curious wish. She said around line 90, "Many times I've heard stories told how it could be in days of old. In this same land adventures fell to folk and helped the miserable. Knights found young women beautiful, noble withal desirable. Ladies found lovers of great price, so handsome, valiant, courteous. They were not blamed, and what had been was never known, was never seen. If such can be, if such was done, such things fell out for anyone. God, for whom all is possible, would grant it to me my wish fulfilled." It's a rather meta moment. Marie de France's character is aware of the kind of story she's in. She reflects on having read tales of courtly love that inspired the very lay that we are reading. She prays Knight, someone so different from her husband, so much like a fairy tale compared to her life, to come and rescue her. She wants a life of adventure, and from the stories she knows, the only way that will start for her is with a knight, and so she gets one. It's almost as though she has called him into existence from her imagination. Of course, it's not just a knight that appears, as you know if you've read Yonec. It's a bird, a hawk to be exact. Now, the hawk is an important one to take a look at. So, Sarah Patterson White, a PhD in historical theology, notes that the motif of a bird man appears in other fairy tales. That's very common. Hawk mentioned type of bird in medieval stories, and they were associated with nobility and courtliness. And she says that while it's not clear why the knight is a bird, we don't really get an explanation for that. What's important is that this allows him to come to her, to get, up the tower. And so, what she mentions here that I think is really the focus is that even though she's been locked away on a man's whim, here it's her desire that summons a desirable man. Now, birds are often used as symbols of freedom, and this knight offers a kind of freedom that the lady doesn't have by giving her love, happiness, and hope. His arrival ushers in new possibilities, but what's notable is that her wish, her prayer, enables him to come. She reaches the point of crisis. She's almost lost hope. She's been wishing for death to take her. And then she wishes instead for a kind of salvation in the form of a lover. So this implies this hawk turned man who, like St. Luke's account of the angels, says, "Fear ye not." So, what are this bird's tidings of great joy? That the lady is loved. Let's take a look at line 121. So, turned into the night, and he tells her, "O lady, do not fear me so. The hawk's a noble bird, although its secrets are obscure to you. Cherish, trust what you know is true, and take me for your lover. Dame, it is for that he said I came. I have long loved you. I have long held in my heart desire so strong. No other woman has been my lover, and I shall never have another. But I could not come to you. Out of my palace could not move, had you yourself not summoned me." And then I think is something like, "And now I can be your mon ami." He can be her lover. So the lady's agency, her power, she has made it possible for him to come to her. And then we get this rather strange moment where Moldmarek has to prove that he's not actually evil. So he pledges his faith to God and is willing to take the Eucharist, communion, to prove that he means it. That in theory, if he took the Eucharist and was insincere, his body would reject it or God would strike him down. So interestingly, Moldmarek transforms into the lady in order to receive the Eucharist. So we have this moment where the lady and a version of herself are lying in bed together. But at any rate, once he eats the bread and drinks the wine and nothing bad happens, she's satisfied that he means her no harm, that he is legitimate. So maybe irony here, some humor. Now, the lady will agree to an affair with Moldmarek as long as he proves he's a Christian. But adultery is usually considered a sin. So, doesn't that seem a little contradictory? And yet, the tradition of courtly love, as we know, prizes extramarital affairs as truer love than most marriages at the time, which for many women were little more than business transactions, as we said before. This affair would have been left unconsummated, but not so for Marie de France. We're told that after this exchange, the lovers laughed and played, which is a bit of a euphemism. And we don't know how many times he has visited her and what all they get up to, but we are told specifically that, quote, "early and late and night and day, she had her pleasure with her knight." Marie of France is not holding back here, folks. Alas, all cannot be well. The lady is so bursting with love and happiness that her husband notices something is different about her. Obviously, he's never seemed happy because he's never done anything to make her that happy. So he suspects, rightfully so, that she's having an affair and sets into action a plot to catch her and kill Modric. Now, we won't rehearse the rest of the story, That's something that you can dig into and maybe talk about on the discussion board. But I want us to stop for a moment and think about the significance of her so far. So Marie de France has presented us with a young woman who could stand in for so many young women forced into marriages that they didn't want. Like other well born ladies, she can read, and in stories like this one, she finds refuge. Her savior knight comes in a wave of religious imagery. Medieval scholar Kimberly Tate Anderson notes a similarity between a hawk representing a man who comes to impregnate the woman and the Holy Spirit, which came in the form of a dove to the Virgin Mary before she was impregnated by God, essentially. So, for some readers of Marie de France's time, this story would border on sacrilege, though for others, it might be taken as appropriately spiritual. Now, if we look at this story symbolically, as other scholars have, there's a lot to analyze, and I'm really looking forward to your thoughts on the story. Different interpretations of many aspects of this lay, but have particularly been interested in what Maldorec may represent. And so he's been categorized as what he seems, a fairy lover from another realm, a subject of which many poems have been devoted. He has been analyzed as a manifestation of the lady's imagination, and he comes to represent a sort of encounter with spirituality in physical form. And so their union is something spiritual. He's also been studied as a product of desire, of the lady's desire, and also as a kind of chess piece in storytelling, a character who announces a shift in the narrative from real experience, reality, to a fantasy that the lady clings to ease her suffering. One way we might approach the story of Yonec is that it is in many ways a story about storytelling or about writing. You'll see a lot of the early works we'll be reading by Wister, they're very self-conscious about the act of writing. We have poems that are about what it means to be a female poet. Poems that talk about women accused of not writing their own poetry. So the topic of writing comes up in a lot of women's writing. This constant having to prove oneself as being a legitimate writer. And that emphasis is really obvious. The women come right out and say it. And that's not exactly what Marie de France does here, but I think we can make a good case for this being a theme that is in her work, the idea of a woman as a creator. Considering what we know, that the whole story hinges on the main character having read love stories. That's what shifts the plot from her imprisonment to a change in her life and the rising action of the lay. So, considering Moldmark as a sort of creation of the ladies, born out of her reading, her imagination, and her desire, this gives her agency and power in her own destiny, and perhaps reflects what Marie de France herself was doing by choosing to be brave and write a story because she wants to, because she doesn't want to hide her gifts, and she's not going to blush and be silent about the things she's interested in, like love and desire. If we think back to the start of the story, it just founded on the idea that the old man wants an heir. He essentially wants the young lady to create life for him, but their union does not produce it. Since she is able to reproduce with Moldmark, it tells us that it's either the old man who was infertile, which is very likely, or there's something supernatural about Moldmark, which, well, there is. But the most important part is the lady's role, and that's what changes everything. She summons the night, she gives birth to their child, and Yonec grows up to be someone who can find happiness that she and her knight couldn't in their life. He avenges them, he lives on, he rules a kingdom. So this is Marie de France's creation. This is her character's creation. Now, it's not happily ever after for the lady and her knight, unfortunately. And so that might be something you think about as you're reflecting back on the story, possibly talking about it on the discussion board. Why do they have to die in the story? And we've only touched upon a few possible interpretations and just a few key moments in this play. There are many, many other things that you can think and talk about. So I'll stop here and leave you to think about the rest of the story, your own observations and interpretations. There's plenty to analyze, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. If you have any questions, let me know. And when you're ready, go ahead and move on to the next module page.